Good morning. I have to say that since I'm a minister, this reflection, of course, just became a sermon, so apologies or not. One of my ways of keeping hope and finding hope is through creating delight and knowing that delight lives in our bodies and that it is a sibling of justice, of being able to go after justice, is remembering why we fight, and we fight for love and joy and each other. So with that being said, we're going to do a in the seat social justice stretch. If you feel inclined, you can of course stand up. And this is how it's going to go. We are going to reach up to the sky for inspiration, and then down to the grassroots for power. We are going to then stomp out injustice, and then move with the winds of change. And this always feels good on my hips, so we're going to keep moving with the winds of change. Reach up to the sky for inspiration, down to the grassroots for power. Stomp out injustice and move with the winds of change. Now we're going to do one silently. Blessed be our movements for justice. In remote forests in Madagascar, there is an orchid that is somewhat star-shaped, a delicate branching of white petals called the star of the forest. She may look delicate, and one may think her name comes from her shape, but she is also a star of the forest because she grows in complete darkness. This isn't just a survival technique for her, she thrives in darkness. The orchid gets nutrients from underground fungus, does not have chlorophyll for photosynthesis, but cuts through the dirt every so often to attract pollinators, such as ants. I loved reading about this orchid. I love knowing that there is thriving in darkness. This orchid is a reminder for me about the ability for life to survive in unexpected places in unexpected times. To grow in dark forest floors that, though may be threatened by the destruction of our earth, at least for now, host orchids. Beautiful, delicate, perhaps a piece of joy, thriving orchids living happily and healthily in the dark. We are all in need of the possibility that exists within these thriving orchids. As we begin to take in the results from this past election and what it will mean for us, our loved ones, our wider communities, our country, and our world, I urge you to take a breath. And right now, let's just take a moment, take a breath, let it out, and then take some good air in. Take a moment to be in the forest, to be with those orchids that thrive and have thrived in the dark. In my work as a leader of the organization UU Mass Action, I work alongside organizers on legislation, advocacy, and change in the areas of climate, environmental, indigenous, immigration, economic justice, and decarceration. I am sure things will shift, but honestly, most of our justice work remains the same, if not becomes more urgent. I'm wondering if during this presidency, we not as individuals, not as congregations, but as a faith, as Unitarian Universalists who exist all over the globe, I'm wondering if we will decide that now we really want a better world, and we will fight for it like we never have before. I hope this is our chance to not only fight fascism and the injustice Trump will inevitably bring, but to finally change the status quo that has been harming us for a long time. to bring down our systems that do not work, that are broken and cause harm, and instead create a community, a world of community of care. In these movement spaces doing the work, I find myself standing in that awkward space of not being very hopeful, but having hope for the possibility of hope. I know that people have the capacity to do better, even when we have seen again and again and again that we do not act on that capacity. When thinking about what blocks my ability to move from having hope in hope to just hoping, I think about my ability to grieve. I believe that if we take time and space to grieve, and being in grieving, we will have a greater capacity for joy, for delight. And we need this joy, this delight, to continue on in these movement spaces, to remember why we fight. Many summers ago, Joni Mitchell, who is now 80 years old, sang a surprise guest appearance at the Newport Jazz Festival. She sang Both Sides Now with Brandi Carlile. This is a haunting, definitely sad song, and when I watched the video those summers ago, I did not weep, I sobbed. I'm sure many of you have experienced songs, music, art, things, moments that are breaking, that broke you open. I think the song for me, both in its melody and the lyrics, about knowing life and actually realizing you don't at all, and that's okay, broke me open. I know also during this election, being in community and singing was a saving grace, a reminder for me that not only am I not alone, but there's something about singing that reminds me my soul is not alone, and there's some strength and hope in that. I also believe that talking about music is not the same as experiencing it. I don't know how many of you know this song, but I'm going to sing part of it, and I encourage you, as you're willing and able, to pop on in. Rows and flows of angel hair, and ice cream castles in the air, and feather canyons everywhere. I've looked at clouds that way, but now they only block the sun. They rain and snow on everyone. So many things I would have done, but clouds got in the way. I've looked at clouds from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow it's clouds, illusions I recall. I really don't know love at all. Moons and Junes and Ferris wheels, the dizzy dancing way you feel as every fairy tale comes real. I've looked at love that way. I've looked at love from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow it's love's illusions I recall. I really don't know love at all. Part of me sobbing in this moment was part just due to beauty, part loving Joni Mitchell and seeing her still singing, which also she's still singing now, it's incredible. And part of it was I just needed to cry. I was reminded of the Adrienne Marie Brown quote, "Remember, you are water. Of course you leave salt trails. Of course you are crying." In a sermon about despair written in 2019, another special year, Reverend Victoria Safford responds to the despair and grief people were feeling at the time with this: Time is not an arrow. It is not an arrow shot from the bow at the beginning and propelling history inevitably in one doomed direction. I'm just going to repeat that again. Time is not an arrow shot from the bow at the beginning and propelling history inevitably in one doomed direction. It is not. There are no straight lines in this round world, no guarantees. Seasons change and movements grow. Hearts beat on, and all things like water ebb and flow. Despair can give way to resistance if you voice it in community. Grief can become resilience if you honor the weight of it and let others help you bear it. Cynicism can be melted, grim certainty unrusted. Apathy can wake up, and if the music is loud enough and strong enough. In this time of our history, when the violence rages on, wars begin and continue, our climate feels on the edge, if not already in the midst of disaster. There is reason for despair. There is reason for despair and grief, for rage, for cynicism, for apathy. It is one thing to talk about melting cynicism, having despair give way to resistance, but how does all of this come about? How do we not become consumed by despair? How do we carve and make room for hope, joy, and delight, the things that make our world, our survival, worthwhile and beautiful? My recipe is threefold. First, don't forget your people. Gather them, cook for them, care for them, love them in all the ways. And also be gathered. Let your people in times when you cannot gather to be gathered, have people cook for you, love for you, take you in. Gather your people, be gathered, and then let yourself cry, let yourself grieve. And finally, after being gathered, after grieving, we remind ourselves why we survive. This is the part where we dance, we eat the food we have cooked, we sing, we remember that our survival is beautiful. Do not forget your people. Let yourself cry and grieve and remember why we want to survive. Often before I board a plane, I text many people. Then I turn my phone on airplane mode, and when I land, I turn it on and it starts dinging and fills up with text. All these messages from people I love. Do things such as this, little things to remind people that you love them. Open yourself to being reminded of all the people that love you. Be with these people and remember that life always wants life. Next, we let go of despair and let our bodies, our hearts grieve. Once the people have been gathered, fed, and loved, let the grief be felt, let the tears fall. Remember that you are water, of course you leave salt trails. Tears that are not pain themselves, but a release of the pain, a physical representation of grief. As a leader, a minister, part of accepting grief is necessary to staying in the work, to staying connected to the world. Accepting grief is part of avoiding the despair. Not only do we need to grieve, but we are grieving in the midst of so many losses and circumstances that persist, that continue, or get worse. We are tired of making so many decisions that are not flippant decisions, but that relate to our survival. We are tired of living through uprisings and seeing racism viciously persist. We are tired of violence building rather than diminishing. We are tired of war, of hatred being acted upon by violence and by occupation. We are tired of fighting for an earth that some seem to care about and others do not. We are tired of working tirelessly for a government that does not show up for us. We are tired. Of course we are crying. And as we gather, let us cry. Let us remember that despair can be paralyzing, but grief doesn't have to be. In an article about eco-anxiety entitled, "How Can I Stay Hopeful as the World Burns?" Aisha Mirza interviews Robin Wall Kimmerer, who you might know as the author of the book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants. Mirza asks Kimmerer how she stays hopeful, and she says, "The grief is heartbreaking. But what I try to do is feel that deeply. Grief can paralyze us. It can bring us to despair and hopelessness. But when we recognize that the pain we are feeling is ecological compassion, it's love. It's love for the world that is strong and fierce and lets us say, not on my watch." The other day, I walked out of a church after giving a similar sermon about grief. I have a daughter, as you all know, who is a bit over 1.5, and she was at a different church nursery. And after I finished and shook a few hands on my way out, I went up to pick my daughter to come back to coffee hour. I came back to the chattering, coffee-laden air, holding my daughter, Simone. Someone approached me and said, "You must be much more hopeful than you let on if you brought this beautiful baby into the world." And I am. I am much more hopeful than I let on. Am I scared, grief-stricken, and angry too? Yes, but again, life wants life. And I have so much hope for this broken world. I brought life into the world because I believe there is a great life for her to live out there. And so I gather my people, I let myself be gathered. I come home to a house where 2 babies live. We cook meals for each other. We sing, we say grace. We pass the babies around. We tend to the 9-year-old and pet the dog. We set and create space so that there's room for when the tears come, they are released. We sweep floors, bake bread, lend each other our cars. We make themed cocktails, bake cakes, and celebrate the life that is here, the life that is us. We gather, we cry, we organize, we celebrate our survival amidst it all. It is no joke to feel grief deeply, especially when there's so much to grieve. But I think it helps when we know that in part to grieve is to love, and our power is going to rest in our love. The last part of my recipe is to act on this love, to remember why we move, why we work to protect this world. For this part of the recipe, you have to do what you love. Experience joy, delight, dance, sing, go see art, go to the ocean, go to the mountains, listen to something that makes you laugh. Remind yourself of why you love this life. We are excellent at loving. Let us not let that go to waste. Our perhaps broken hearts certainly have a lot of territory to cover, but I have hope and knowledge that our broken hearts can cover it. I think it's going to take a lot of work, but not more than we can handle. We do not do it alone, and we do not do it in despair. To want to survive in and of itself is a beautiful thing. And to want to survive in a broken world that is perhaps already in flames, on fire, is perhaps at its core hope. Gather your people, let your tears flow, make music that is strong enough, that is loud enough. Let us leave salt trails, tears of grief, not despair. Let us nurture our longing to survive. Let us remember why we fight, and let us remember this by creating and finding joy. By loving the people who have gathered us, let us cry and grieve with them. Let us remember that our pain is love and that we've always had more than enough of that. Of course you are crying, of course we are crying. Let the tears flow as reminders of how much we love this world. Let us survive because of our joy, because of our people, because we have always been good at loving. These are hard times, but I am finding hope in the fact that our systems have been broken long before Trump, and maybe now is the time that we're going to build new ones. We have so much collective grief. It is deep, it is present, it is powerful. What if we truly matched our collective grief with action? What if we truly grieved as a society and then took collective action that is just as deep, just as present, just as powerful? Let us keep building power. Let us not ignore our grief, but find energy and life within it. And let us match this energy and life with action. Let us build the new systems we need. Let us dream them, and let us delight in dreaming them. Let us remember that our survival is beautiful, and our want to survive in a broken world is perhaps at its core hope. So we, in our beautiful survival, are already inherently hopeful. Amen, and blessed be.